Buenas noches from Buenos Aires and Buenos dias, Australia. Thank you for joining us for Patient Voice Initiatives, Patient Community Takeaways. So we're here at the end of HTAi 2025 Buenos Aires. It's still the 19th of June for us, but the 20th of June for you. And we have had 5 extraordinary days, 5 incredibly long days. And I'm really delighted to say that tonight with me, I have Claire Stewart from the Mito Foundation, and I also have snuck in a 2024 patient voice partner, Chris Pierce, so no holidays for Chris. And we also have recordings made by our 2 other 2025 patient voice partners, Megan Cross and Cara Philpott, because they are actually already on their planes back to Australia. So as always, I just want to acknowledge our any elders and any First Nations people joining us. We're really excited over this next hour just to share with you some of the things we got out of attending this meeting. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of an oversight and of what happened, an overview of what happened, and then we're going to see the summaries from both Cara and from Megan, and then I will be crossing over to those of us who are online, Claire and Chris, and then we'd love your questions as well. So this year we're in Buenos Aires. It's the first time in I think about 16 years that HTAi has been in South America. We had a wonderful turnout, about 800 people here, and the meeting was twinned with the Pan American Health Organization. So they had their meeting on Friday and their workshops on Saturday, and then joined into our meetings. So we had this amazing representation from across the Caribbean as well as South America. We had a number of ministries of health and researchers and people who had never been to a health technology assessment conference before. So it's been a really dynamic space. I'm going to tell you, and please vegetarians block your ears now, there has been a large amount of meat, as is the way of South America. There has been a lot of exchange and stimulating conversation. So the theme this year was next gen evidence, diversifying and advancing HTAi to meet global demands. We had 2 days of workshop, and then we had 2.5 days of conference. And with that, I think it might be quite nice to begin by hearing some reflections recorded by Cara Philpott earlier this evening. So just bear with me while I share that. And then after Cara, we'll go across to Megan's reflections.
Hi everyone, my name's Cara Philpott. Unfortunately, I'm unable to join you for the live presentation as I'm currently in Santiago Airport, and you may even see the plane behind me, and by the time of the webinar I'll be somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean on my way home. I wanted to provide a couple of notes to introduce myself. I'm from Buraloo, Perth. I have 2 children. My son Lucas is 9 and my daughter Chloe is 8, and Lucas lives with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I was recently appointed as Chair of Neuromuscular WA, and I've been actively involved with the organisation since 2019. My professional background includes over 25 years of experience in human resources and organisation development, and I've spent a lot of time over the last few years as a patient or consumer representative. And I'm mindful of the language and I use the terms patient and consumer almost interchangeably. In Australia, we use the word consumer, and in most other contexts, I use the word patient, so please bear with me. I applied for the Patient Voice Partner of 2025 program as a way to continue my work and my passion for involving patients in health technology assessment, or HTAi. I hope to use this program as a platform to further embed my patient knowledge in HTAi in the processes, as well as to identify opportunities to provide faster access to emerging health technologies. This program is important to me as I recently graduated with a Master of Health Economics, and that theoretical knowledge is fantastic, but this partner program and attending the HTAi annual meeting provides practical and real-world applications. My project will focus on patient involvement in economic modelling, which is often referred to as a black box. I haven't fully scoped the project yet, but I aim to provide an insight around how patient data can be used and perhaps how patients could potentially be further involved in economic modelling. Before I continue, I want to say a huge thank you to the sponsors, and I hope that Anne will provide a list of the sponsors at the end of this webinar. Without their support and the Patient Voice Partner Grant, I would not have been able to attend the HTAi meeting in Buenos Aires. And I also encourage all consumer representatives to apply for the 2026 program. In terms of the conference format and content, it is intense. It's 5 days of workshops, presentations, panel discussions, and poster presentations. There's a huge volume and variety of topics and themes, and the biggest challenge is actually deciding which topic to attend at which session, because there's up to 6 different topics being presented at the same time, all of which are fascinating. I really enjoyed the social aspects and the networking of this program, as well as attending the HTAi annual meeting. There was over 800 people with the same intention of improving healthcare, but the social connections commenced long before I got on the flight from Perth. The various WhatsApp groups helped to create networks and introductions before the annual meeting. During the week in Buenos Aires, I was able to learn from other attendees and share our experiences and thoughts. I even connected with some experts who I can reach out to regarding my project. The 2 themes I followed most closely were stakeholder engagement in HTAi and the emerging use and integration of artificial intelligence in HTAi. And let me state that my experience in AI is currently limited to ChatGPT, so I have a lot to learn. Generative AI has the potential to transform HTAi processes. Imagine preparing a systematic review using AI. The time saved would be months. And I was most interested in how AI can generate data. The use of a digital twin could transform randomised clinical trials on both the control and intervention arms. AI can be used to identify new markers for a disease, and medicine's development could be fast-tracked. Surely this has the potential to provide faster access to new treatments. However, I don't believe that AI will replace the need for patients or patient advocacy, but I can see a potential risk that patient representatives are left behind if we don't stay up to date with technology, which is always a challenge in our busy days. The increasing evidence of patient involvement and the continual drive to seek meaningful patient engagement. There were several presentations that talked about the importance of organisations collecting qualitative data, particularly around stories of what it's like to live with a condition, what would be important outcomes for patients, and information about the impact and costs faced by parents and caregivers. And it's interesting how other jurisdictions use patient knowledge at various stages of their HTAi processes. It was very interesting to learn how other jurisdictions use HTAi, and the examples provided of fast-track HTAs that can complete a recommendation within a few weeks really differs from our current process in Australia. So it was really interesting to hear other countries have implemented a fast-track program. The other highlight for this program for me was listening to the Enhanced Consumer Engagement Process presentation. I was one of the consumer representatives for the co-design working group, and to see our work presented at a global level was a truly proud moment. And based on the recommendations from that report, it seems that Australia is on track, but I wonder if Australia can be flexible and responsive enough to meet the changing nature of HTAi in the same way that other jurisdictions are. And of course, HTAi is all about evidence, so here is some evidence that I attended the HTAi 2025. In the top left photo, I'm joined by Anne Single, Claire Stewart and Megan Cross, who need no further introduction. I'm sure you know all 3 well. In the bottom photo, I'm joined by Genevieve Handley from Cystic Fibrosis Australia as a fellow member of the co-design working group, and we joined Alicia Seagrave on stage. Alicia is the Director of the Consumer Evidence and Engagement Unit in the Office of HTAi at the Department of Health, Disability and Ageing. That's all for now, but please reach out if you have any questions or wish to connect. Thanks very much.
And thank you to Cara, who, as you can tell, recorded that in above and beyond challenging conditions at the airport. But we're so pleased to have her thoughts on the day. And one of the things she pointed out there was that we had the head of Alicia, the head of the Consumer Evidence and Engagement Unit, and what a fantastic opportunity that's been for our patient community here in Australia to learn at the same time as being able to talk to someone straight from the department. So now I'm just going to switch over and I'm going to share with you the video that Megan Cross beautifully prepared for us this afternoon. She was heading off to the airport. Over to Megan.
Hi, my name's Megan Cross. I'm the co-founder and CEO for the Foundation for Angelman Syndrome Therapeutics Australia. I live in Cairns with my husband and 2 daughters. The youngest, Molly, lives with Angelman syndrome. Sorry I can't be with you live tonight. Right now I'll likely be boarding my flight home. I want to echo Kara's thank you to the sponsors, to the Patient Voice Initiative, and Anne for allowing me to be here. And to the other Patient Voice partners, thank you for being on this journey with me. Sharing insights with you has been invaluable. I'm so happy to be selected as one of the partners this year, and I've included a quote on this slide from my application. As both a newcomer to the world of HTAi and part of a patient organisation with phase 3 clinical trials, I really wanted to understand what we need to do to actively participate in any future processes. I have so many wonderful ideas from the past 5 days to help me to continue to build ideas and direction around my project, but I already know it will very much centre around readiness and caregiver experience data to support future assessments. As I mentioned, I'm very new to HTAi, so my highlights are from very fresh eyes. I admit that I was quite naive to the whole process, so I really enjoyed the HTAi 101 and one of the workshops for the first day. I actually wonder if that's the same with other small nonprofits, and I enjoyed a presentation from another patient organisation on how they had sessions to educate their community, and I'll absolutely be taking that one home. There were a lot of amazing global resources out there, and I'm excited to explore more of the work that the Patient Focused Medicines group have done with data. And this is likely to be quite central to the project that I'm developing. There was a strong, respected patient voice, especially for advocates for rare diseases, and that's largely because of the work the Rare Disease Interest Group is doing. There was also genuine appetite to include patient and caregiver input across all stakeholders. I'm really encouraged by the global momentum on qualitative data. And the other thing that struck me is how different countries are. You know, you have a really advanced HTA system in Sweden, and then there's some countries that don't have any systems at all and anywhere in between. The other thing is we shouldn't wait to build our own data, build on our own data and capture stories. I want to finish with something that really stood out to me, and I know it impacted the other patient voice partners as well. There was a discussion on a sibling's testimony on autism's impact on her life. And I think about my daughter's diagnosis and how obviously it impacts her a lot, as well as her parents and her other sister. While we're not in a place in Australia where this type of evidence can be heard right now, I think it's really important, and it's lovely to see this type of data being captured and turned into outcomes. Again, thank you, and I really look forward to sharing my project with you in the future.
And thank you to Megan for that as well. I'm so impressed at what our patient voice partners have been able to achieve over the last couple of days. And some of them who are online at the moment, Chris and Claire, have been in this space a bit longer. So I'm really keen to hear their feedback as well. But I just wanted to show you who you're hearing from tonight. So you've heard from Kara, you've heard from Megan, who've done a great job putting those packages together for us. And now I'm really keen to hear from Claire. Claire, this is your second time coming to HTAi annual meeting. We're delighted to have you as a 2025 patient voice partner. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and why you came? And we'd love to hear your reflections.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Anne. As you said, I managed to, I think through the patient citizen involvement group, got some funding to attend Adelaide. Obviously, it wasn't quite so expensive to travel down there. So that was 2 years ago. And at the time, I had been involved in a couple of HTAi processes, particularly medicines listings for a new medicine for a disease that my sister had, which is the original reason that I ended up being a patient advocate. But I don't think I understood anything about really what happened behind the scenes, very much a black box process. So going to Adelaide was very much an eye-opening exercise in trying to really understand all the different working parts, all the very sometimes specific and sometimes not quite so shared understanding terminology that's used. Amazing how, with language differences, I think adds more complexity. But certainly, getting an idea of that terminology and just how deep and wide this thing called health technology assessment was sort of my Adelaide experience. So coming back 2 years later, into a meeting that was less Australian dominated, although I was still proud of how many Australians were there, I think was quite a different experience. Like Cara and Megan, I've thought ahead and have a few thoughts. I won't bother sharing slides, but I'm just going to look at them so that I have some structure to my ramblings. I wrote down 6 things, and when I say I wrote them down, I think I scribbled them about 2 hours ago. So hopefully they make some sense. The first thing that I wanted to the first thing I wanted to share is that I attended 2 workshops before the conference, which I thoroughly recommend because they go deep into a topic. The first of those was about ethics in HTAi, so run by some academic bioethicists who I have the privilege of working with some bioethicists in some of our work in the Mito Foundation, but they're such an interesting discipline, and the way that they think about things is so different. The thing that I took away from that workshop was really understanding that ethics in HTAi is from 2 different perspectives. We need to think both about the ethics of HTAi as well as the ethical issues within HTAi. The example that workshop looked at, which was kind of comfortable, given it was in the area that I feel comfortable working in, was around the use of non-invasive prenatal testing. And so it was fascinating to hear different people's perspectives, and some of our colleagues in countries, for example, where termination of pregnancies due to fetal abnormalities is much less accepted. We had lots of really interesting, robust debates about, how should HTAi consider the ethical issues of the technology, in this case, a harmless genetic test that provides information, versus what results from that, and what are the boundaries of that ethical analysis, and how, from the academics' review, they certainly find that ethical analysis is not always part of health technology assessment. So that was some really interesting food for thought. The second workshop that I attended was the 20-year celebration of the Patient and Citizen Involvement Group, which is an interest group within HTAi, which a lot of patient advocates are in there driving, but not just patient advocates, lots of other very interested and committed people working in the medicines industry, in consulting, in HTAi bodies. And that really, I'm just trying to check where my notes went. I've literally got them scribbled on the back of a map of Buenos Aires. That really sort of got me thinking about the sort of power of transparency. There were some examples from here in Latin America of HTAi deliberations that were almost live streamed. And the idea in Australia of having that much transparency was almost, I suppose, confronting. I think we use commercial and confidence information as almost a bit of an excuse in Australia to keep things very behind closed doors. But that example and how confronting I found that to be so different from the way we do things then, stuck with me for the rest of the week as I considered opportunities to improve in Australia, and the potential power of increasing transparency and then leading to other things like patient involvement and improved equity and improved understanding of what this process is. As Megan just shared, the potentially the lack of awareness for patient communities that haven't been through this and spent the time learning about it can be a little bit shocking. How could we in Australia use transparency as a way to address those challenges. The other theme of the conference was around equity, and there were several amazing moments where people really called out the importance of that. From a patient advocacy point of view, the starting point is, who are you involving in decision making? And I had the privilege of spending some time with Robin Manuel from Aratoa. I always mispronounce New Zealand's Maori name. And in the closing session, she certainly had a mic drop moment of challenging us all to think about, will true equity in HTAi be achieved while we don't have the ability to really value Indigenous ways of knowing? Slightly potentially less challenging to the status quo was really thinking about what equity looks like when we already struggle in rare diseases. And once you add the intersectionality of rare diseases and things like Indigenous, culturally and linguistically diverse communities, how difficult that feels. And it's okay for it to feel difficult, but it doesn't mean we should not try to make progress. It struck me as, collaboration is certainly the key to that, and that was similar to what others at the conference shared about what we can be doing to improve equity in HTAi. All right, where am I at? That's only half of my points. I'm going to try and speed through the others, and maybe Anne can ask some probing questions later on.
Yeah,
I'm sure you're
and
sick
look,
of being talked
I
at.
would just I would do a quick reflection there, because you're bringing out,
Sure.
I mean, it's such a rich 5 days, and it's incredibly hard to distill it in the way we've asked you to. So, and I'll come back to you. It makes me think to acknowledge that we've got Zhao Press online. Zhao's our Vice Chair of Patient and Citizens Interest Group in HTAi. So hi, Zhao. We really missed you not being with us at annual meeting, and so thrilled to have you online. But that final session that you alluded to, where Robin Manuel really challenged us to think about the structures, I thought that was a real highlight for me after days of having some really high push around equity. And also South Americans are just incredibly switched on around the way they use qualitative evidence, I think, and they're really well, they've got good resources there. And I also found that bit where Amelia Caro was talking in the final area, and about sort of saying, kind of, what confidence can we have if we've missed some voices here? So Robin Manuel from Aotearoa, New Zealand, has been such a force in this conference, and I know we've all prevailed on her to ask her for her input, but I think it really added to the conference too. So those were just some quick reflections, but I think that last plenary led by Cliff Goodman, where people had to vote and talk about the issues that mattered. And I think that really resonated with us in Australia, because, we know from our HTAi policy and methods review that the number one thing coming out was actually transparency. And the first recommendation of the reviews are around equity. So maybe that's why we all felt, quite gripped by that discussion. Anyway, quick reflection back, and giving you a chance to catch your breath, Claire. And now I want to hear more, please.
All right, I have 3 more. One of these is quite simple. So 1 small one and 2 larger ones. The other one, as I alluded to in my vague introduction about my experience in Adelaide, was attending again with, I suppose, 2 years of part of my brain trying to piece things together. The nuances around what patient involvement means to different people. As the others have said, there was a lot in this conference about qualitative data and this idea of a term that was being used around patient-based evidence. And that's a really distinct thing from patient and citizen involvement. As an example, there was a qualitative panel discussion, and we had, I have forgotten Sophie's surname. Maybe Anne can fill me in there.
It's Sophie Verko, so Werko. Some of you will know her, yeah.
So Sophie Verko shared a very robust approach that one of the HTAi bodies in Sweden goes through to identify, synthesize, and critically appraise qualitative evidence. And that was one approach, and they use the term patient-based evidence. I'd argue that, clinical trial outcomes are pretty patient-based too. They're measuring patient outcomes. So, how clear are any of these terms? But then the rest of the panel spoke about using qualitative methods for, analysing what input came in. And that came up several times. So if we have patient and citizen engagement in the process and they're providing testimonials and entries into that, could we use qualitative methods to synthesize those? So that's a little bit different, but a little bit similar. And then the last sort of member of that panel talked about that was one of the cancer peak organizations here in Latin America, talked about how they use qualitative methods to engage with their community in order to inform their participation in HTAi processes. And so these are all different flavors of what sort of patient-based evidence / engagement / involvement looks like. And so broadening what we think about when we think about patient-based involvement in HTAi for me. Now, would you believe after all of that, that was what I was going to try and say quickly. The second last point, which is a little bit chunkier in my mind and maybe not quite so well thought out yet, is this concept around the flexible boundaries of HTAi, or these decisions about what can we use HTAi for, and maybe where we should stop. What sorts of problems does it help us solve? I certainly, up until probably this conference, I think I still, like many Australians, thought about HTAi as very much a process that only happens and only should happen within PBAC and MSAC processes, making decisions on what we put in our PBS and what we include in Medicare funding. Lots of the discussion during an HTAi meeting is use is far more broad than that. And so thinking about, what could we be doing in Australia? The Swedish example that Megan mentioned in her slides, and as a sibling of someone who also had intellectual disability caused by a syndrome not dissimilar to Megan's daughter's syndrome, that sibling example certainly had me welling up with tears. But more broadly, that was an HTAi process that was using HTAi to inform social care decisions, and the analysis and the appraisal of qualitative evidence that identified some of those sibling challenges actually led to the creation of new services targeted to siblings of children with disabilities. So I love the fact that HTAi was being used actively in Sweden to inform social care policies and services, and the possibilities for us in Australia, particularly as the National Disability Insurance Agency starts to establish evidence as a thing that they're going to start making decisions on more. I think it's a really interesting opportunity to explore, and particularly rare disease organisations that often straddle both disability and health policy might be uniquely placed to kind of join those two worlds a little bit together. So that's an interesting opportunity. The other sort of part of that flexible use of HTAi and what we think of when we say HTAi was another panel discussion around life cycle HTAi, which is a whole focus of some HTAi members. And I'm really interested personally in how patients can get involved in horizon scanning and valuing patient knowledge in that setting. Now I'm on my last one, Anne. Did you want me to keep going or do you want me to stop?
Do keep going, because you're just bringing back so many great memories of things I've already slipping my mind in the past few days. I'd love to hear next.
Okay, the last thing that I pulled together a couple of hours ago was this sort of ongoing change management process and the importance of having Australians participate in HTAi, even when it is a long way away, is how can we continue to kind of keep the conversation going and have active conversations with Australians, Australia's HTAi bodies, Australia's other health policy makers and stakeholders, so that we can continue to have, the reforms that we have committed to, but having listened to all of these experiences around the world, what's obvious to me is that cannot be the end of our aspirations. I'm very aware of the fact that we haven't really started implementing any of that yet, so that might be quite a challenge to put on the table today. But with the particular focus that I have in my work, particularly looking at patient engagement and what that can look like and how that can improve, but also the way that we can use HTAi for rare disease related health technologies to improve equity and how that can happen. And I think the thing that I was most thinking about is what does that feedback loop look like? How can we have more visibility over how patient citizen engagement and patient-based evidence or qualitative research is actually influencing the assessments and the decisions? Because I think without that feedback loop, it's really challenging to ensure that valuable and scarce patient resources, and whether that's an individual patient that has to share their story and take the time and the emotional labor and the re-traumatization involved in that, or whether it's patient advocacy groups that are often spending money on creating what they think is useful with no knowledge of whether it is. And I'm conscious, I know that that was a key HTAi review recommendation that I'm super excited that to me is low-hanging fruit. Not speaking on behalf of the implementation committee, but that's my opinion. So I'm really keen to see what that could achieve to get things going in Australia. Not that it's the end point, but also looking as we do things related to other recommendations in our HTAi review, like the re-establishment of horizon scanning in Australia. How can we engage patients in that and make that process more collaborative and transparent? So that were my 6 points. They took a long time to get through. I'm sorry, Anne, that I've chewed up so much time. I just wanted to echo Megan and Kara's thanks to Patient Voice Initiative and its sponsors in making that happen. And a particular congratulations to Anne. It was amazing to be there at the handover ceremony where Anne became the new president of HTAi for 2 years, for the next 2 years, after everything that she's done already, and fantastic sort of hope that her leadership as someone who's come into HTAi from with a patient engagement sort of specialisation, what that might achieve to keep this fantastic momentum going. I think it's really hopeful and wonderful to see. And the comment that Anne was the first person from a patient involvement background to be the HTAi president was met with a round of applause. So well done, Anne, and thank you, PVI.
Look, and well done, Claire, for condensing these huge 5 days into some themes that I think are really important and things that Patient Voice Initiative would love to continue taking forward with the Australian community. And I think your perspective coming from the Mido Foundation and your background with submitting to MSAC is really important here. I was thinking about that issue about that, will you invest in good qualitative research? Will you invest in this sort of patient-based evidence, that robust research into patient needs, preferences, and experiences, if you can't see and if you're not sure it's actually making a difference in improving the quality of decision making? And one of the panels I was on robotic surgery, and I was saying to them, until 2023, we did not really have any good quality evidence to say what are patients' experiences here. We're just making assumptions. So on one hand, I want to encourage technology developers to be doing this research to complement the clinical data sooner. But I know I'm not going to get far in that if actually we're not using it. In fact, I don't want anyone wasting time on things that we're not really using and not really improving decisions. So what you're talking about there really resonates. And the other thing I would just say is super, super proud to come from a patient community and to be president of HTAi. And what I really think this means for our community is actually just the international body that's focused on this area takes the patient community and the patient knowledge so seriously that it recognized that you don't actually need to be a scientist or a doctor or a researcher or a health economist to be the president. Actually, it's absolutely valid to have someone from a patient community. So if, for everyone who's worked hard in this space, it's a reflection on that. And I just wanted to flag that Patient Voice Initiative. I'm sorry, I've got a bit of poor lighting here because I wanted to show you the lights of Buenos Aires out my window, and you really can't see them, and I seem to have gone purple. But we've had these badges, and you may not be able to see them, but it says, "I value patient knowledge." And they have been going like hotcakes here. Everybody wants them. Everybody's wearing them. We've talked about, those of you who joined us for the 6 types of patient knowledge, we've talked about that a lot here. And it's really resonated with people, that idea that patients have unique knowledge that complements traditional scientific knowledge. So I just wanted to share that aspect. Now I'm going to remind you to pop your questions in the chat, but I'm also super thrilled to say that we also have Chris Pierce on the line. And I guess one of the aspirations we had when we introduced the patient voice partners is we learned from our experience of patients attending HTAi when it was in Adelaide. And we knew from that the patients told us from attending, we got knowledge, so we knew more about HTA, but we got confidence. We were confident in our own knowledge and connecting with others. And we also got networks, because Patient Voice Initiative never wants to be taking your voice. We want to be here helping and equipping you to have voices in the health technology assessment space. So we always kind of thought, well, when we do this, we'd be really interested to keep checking in with people and seeing like how valuable this was and what could you do next. So Chris kind of blew our socks off by just proactively going out and just writing an abstract about the program, then having it selected from a hugely competitive field this year, and then getting a grant through HTAi from another hugely competitive field. And so, Chris, I'd love to hand over to you for your reflections, and also just to say, and I know I've said it to you offline, but I know how competitive it was to get a spot on the program this year and how competitive it was to get a grant. And I think it's an absolute recognition of the work you've done in this space and how committed to it you are. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, Anne. Now I'm feeling a little bit.
Yeah, try to make you feel as awkward as possible before speaking.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I guess I think Claire, Cara, and Megan probably touched on really the highlights for me as well. I think the things that I probably went a bit deeper, I think, on the things that have emerged for me over the last 12 months as well, either through doing my project with the PVI partnership, but then also just as I was at Seville last year, I was appointed to one of the MSAC committees. So I have kind of two hats on at the conference. So it was, I guess, digesting information in both those roles. And I think as a consumer member on a HTAi committee, and I have to probably say up front that this is my learnings and not reflective of the department at all, that how we measure or how we synthesize, as Claire said, the consumer voice coming into the HTA processes, and ensuring that voice is valued and is reflected in a really respectful and authentic way. And I guess that comes back to transparency, but I think it goes even further than that, because just showing it is not actually actioning it either. So, and that comes back, I guess, to the qualitative data discussion. And we heard on a number of different presentations about the level of quality. And so again, the lady from Sweden, Sophie, talked about high quality qualitative data. And basically, to bring high quality qualitative data, it needs to be peer reviewed, which many patient organisations or individuals are unlikely or rarely be able to either fund or have already in their community. And that she was talking about there should be a way that we can synthesize both high quality data, there is quality of data which is peer reviewed, but also have that adjunct of what's considered low quality data. Now, we probably wouldn't label it as that, but the non-peer reviewed data, and coupling those together to really bring forward a really strong patient story into the HTA process. I guess the other thing I would like to reflect on, and it came through my project, and it was raised on the last day as well, that outside people who have a passion or either work or have a passion for HTAi, who else knows about HTAi and what it is and the scope? And I think that's something that we probably in Australia need to take on a bit of that sort of how do we bring other stakeholders into the fold a little bit? Because I certainly found through my project when I've talked to either clinicians or researchers who are not involved in HTAi and trying to explain to them the importance of at least considering it in the work that we do, that are kind of met with a lot of blank faces. So I think that's not something unique to Australia, because it was certainly discussed at the conference, but I think something that we can take away back to Australia and keep that in the forefront.
That's really interesting that you bring that up, and it's interesting how that topic comes up. I think Chris, you and I have spoken a bit about in the past about the World Health Organization's resolution on social participation for universal health coverage, and where that came from was that idea that people were increasingly alienated from these institutions. And we know in Patient Voice Initiative, our experience is that people find out about it actually sometimes at just some of the toughest points in their lives, and so you find out about it just when you need to know about it. But other systems, it's more high profile. People realize that's the process running behind decision making, and it's public policy. So I think there's been really interesting discussions there. And what I just did while you were talking is I put a link into SBU. So that's the Swedish non-medicines HTA body that Sophie Verko's qualitative research feeds into. I thought people would be interested because they, Sweden, 5 million people, they punch above their weight, don't they? And they've got those publications that are available in English summarizing evidence. And I think, they might be of interest to people there. And one of the other things that your comments reminded me of, Chris, was that something I got to do in my new role, which was very exciting, is I got to attend the afternoon with ANATA, which is the HTA Bodies Agency that meets on the back of HTAi. So HTAi is HTA Bodies, patient organizations, industry, researchers, payers, and so forth. But ANATA is just the HTA Bodies. And one of the discussions we were having over dinner was about qualitative evidence synthesis, but rapid qualitative evidence synthesis. And actually on the HTAi Patient and Citizens Interest Group webpage, you can find a link to some work that was done in Scotland, which is about that rapid work as well. So I just wanted to mention that in case anyone's interested in following that up. Chris, you spoke to how it was different attending for your third time, and I'm really interested in that. And my experience has been that it's a bit of a roller coaster, the old health technology assessment engagement. You sort of go along, you make sense of it, and then things come along and they sort of slightly confuse you, and then you make sense of that, and then you go on. And one of the things I often find about coming to annual meeting is it's lovely for me the way it tests my assumptions of the health technology assessment I know at work in Australia, and then what other people are doing there. Was there any practice that you sort of saw from overseas and thought, oh, that's a really nice way of doing things? It may not be perfectly suited for Australia, but there's a concept there that I think we could take away. And then Claire, I'm going to switch to you and ask you that one as well. So I'm giving you an extra minute to think about it.
Yeah, look, I think, obviously coming from a patient perspective, the things that I saw that I feel like would have a really strong impact on people who take the time to make a submission to the HTAi process was ways in which different HTAi organisations actually demonstrated back to the community how they had listened and how it had influenced the decisions. And there was one example in particular from Singapore, and they had a physical booklet at the conference, which I grabbed a copy of, but you can also look at it online. And it was really just discussing the whole pamphlet was around how they what HTAi is and how they do bring in the patient's voice, but then they also used particular case studies, and there was one around continuous glucose monitoring. And it had a story of a young boy who, you know, demonstrated the positive impact of that being approved, and just the difference to his quality of life. Again, not only for him, but for his family. And I just thought the strength of that being demonstrated, even just back to that one family, is quite strong, but also just showing anyone else who submitted to that process that their voices were listened to and valued.
And sorry for my hesitation there. I'm just about to put that link to that Singapore book in there, because that's a team that's really just been, it's a really new team. It's only a couple of years old. It was really great to hear from Fiona Pierce as well as Ping T Tan about the work that they're doing there. And you know, their very first step in that area was actually just to map the patient organizations in their area, and now they have a patient panel, and you know, they're just charging along. So I will share that link for that impact book. When you see it, it doesn't look like it belongs to ACE, but it is a trustworthy source. Can I just tell everyone online? And you can have a look at that. Can I go across to you, Claire? Was there anything you saw that you sort of thought, oh, that might be some low-hanging fruit for us, or actually it might be some challenging fruit for us, but I think it's worth investing in?
I feel like I've sort of covered most of the things that I thought about, but look, I think the challenge that I'm thinking about is how to get the Australian mito community ready to participate in HTAi, and the question about how much do they really need to understand is something that came up a few times in the conference that I've been thinking about. You know, on the one hand, we talk about why we don't want HTAi to be a black box. But on the other hand, we don't want having to feel like they've done a graduate diploma in health economics in order to feel qualified to participate, is sort of on the other side. So how do we, as patient advocacy organisations, encourage participation without having this, you know, understanding HTAi as a barrier to that? I think it's important that if people are interested in learning more, that there is accessible information and resources available to them. What's encouraging is I think we do have a lot of that, and a fair proportion of what I'm thinking of there is coming out in Australia, coming out of Patient Voice Initiative, but obviously there are other resources as well, and how do we connect people to that without it being perceived as a barrier to participation? Because fundamentally, when I talk to people one-on-one about what HTAi is, I generally describe it as, you know, the way that we can make good decisions about what healthcare is accessible to us in Australia. But with our complex and fragmented health system, you know, even that is a inadequate kind of description. So yeah, that's something extra, I suppose, on my mind. That's a bit of a challenge that, in addition to the work that we're doing now with in Mito Foundation, you know, there are 300 plus different types of mitochondrial disease, and fortunately, we're starting to see the first therapies come out of clinical trial. Our focus as an organisation is how can we maximise the number of clinical trial sites in Australia, so Australians living with mito don't have to wait 10 years to have the opportunity to access medicines. I'd love it if it was much shorter than 10 years, just even if outside of clinical trials. But how do we overlay that with understanding and getting ready for HTAi without getting kind of distracted and counting our chickens too early? I hope that's a helpful answer.
Yeah, it's a really thoughtful answer. And I've got it, we can see a hand up, and I'm just going to come to it in a minute. I'm going to mention that before we finish, I'm going to just refer back to the keynote address. And I also wanted to just talk a little bit about the international picture and some of the background conversation that was going on in that area during the meeting. I think people might be interested in that as well. But Martin, I can see your hand up. You're very welcome to come on mic and ask your question.
Just, it's okay. Nice to meet you, Claire. I'm a mito patient also. I'm from here, from Argentina. I live here in Buenos Aires. Was so rare, to use a known word, to get in touch with this meeting that was taking place here. And I have no idea before. But just to be short, because we are ahead of time, when I would love to be in touch, I participate in Mito Foundation meetings in Australia even, or in every other places that allows me as a foreigner, but I love to share. You take one of the items I'm worried most these times. In clinical trials, I participated in an FDA Reagan-Udall Foundation last month, and then in a pre-congress in Italy, because I'm Italian also, about these issues in Uniamo, is the federation there. They don't understand qualitative data as data. They don't get it. They don't want it. I mean, we all agreed, even FDA, that you have to put qualitative data in a format that is data. It's not interviews, it's not testimonials, it's not that you have to. And this is key because I was approved in three trials, sorry, but they were not working because they used the 6-minute walk test or stand to sit test. And I know patients are doing great with this drug and the drug get not approval. Only that, but
absolutely.
I'd love to share these issues with you and to come on a kind of international consensus to just figure out how to put this data into the trial before the trial design, not after.
Yeah.
Because after, it's not there taken in account.
Yeah, it's almost too late, and it's absolutely amazing to connect with you in this way. I have been very busy, and I feel a bit guilty being in Buenos Aires and not trying to identify the Mito community to reach out with. So I will try and get in touch with you in some other way, and maybe I've got 2 more days in Buenos Aires. Maybe there's is a coffee to continue this conversation without
Would love
hijacking.
to. I leave you my email. My email.
Yeah, fantastic.
I'm not about to move a lot as a mito patient, but we can
I can come to you.
Let's
see what happens. But without having the Global Mito Community Hijack PVI's webinar, I do think Mito offers a really interesting example, partly because it is such a diverse umbrella term, and understanding the patient community between very different types of mitochondrial disease. Saying that something applies to all people with mito is a pretty almost useless and silly thing to say, because everyone is so different. And the relative infancy of mitochondrial diseases as a recognized health condition means that that diversity, the subtleness and the often stigmatized symptoms of mito, we have a lack of evidence about what does it mean to live with mitochondrial disease, let alone one specific type of mitochondrial disease that might be having a therapy developed for it. So I think that we've almost got we're behind where we should be about having published evidence, but what we do have is a very amazing community that is so willing to share their stories. So one of the things that I want to do in my Patient Voice Initiative project, Megan and Cara mentioned theirs, is really look through the eyes of Mito Foundation, where I work, but certainly not limited to Australia, and understand what role can qualitative research play, and given where we're at with therapy development, how can it inform things like, as Martin says, which outcome measures matter, and are there better outcome measures that need to be developed? We're funding some work, I think with Italy or the US, I can never remember who our co-funder is, to validate some video assessment tools. But how can we help patients come up with new ways to measure things like energy levels, as Martin says, because we don't have good measures of those. A 6-minute walk test is crude and inaccurate, and it's been shown in drug development. The other thing that might echo with other patient communities is the nature of the organisations developing medicines is quite specific. In MITO, we have a huge number of very small medicines companies running on venture capital funding, partly because of the idea that therapies for primary mitochondrial disease might also help us all live forever. So those organisations maybe aren't able to lean on a global large pharmaceutical company's knowledge and skills and experience. And so how can we as advocacy organisations partner with those medicines developers to help them understand and build this in earlier? And the thing that we're trying to grow in MITO Foundation is a qualitative data database, and there's nothing about it that would mean that it couldn't be used globally by the MITO community and collect stories and qualitative data from other global communities, but also potentially a pattern or a repeatable service that could be used by other particularly rare disease communities that don't have a published evidence base. All right, I think we can stop hijacking on MITO. Sorry, Anne, but Martin, I'm really looking forward to emailing you as soon as this is finished. Anne, you're on mute.
Sorry. Excellent. Now I'm not. So one of the things we love about coming to the international meeting is that it enables so many patient groups to connect. And so it's actually lovely that we've done it on this. Now, I know we've just got 3 minutes. I just wanted to check in with Chris to see if you wanted to make any further comments before we finish, Chris.
No, I guess, echoing the other partners, that my journey from Adelaide, where I literally knew nothing, saw this advert for, come to HTAi, and I saw others going, yeah, we're going to do that, to now, and that's largely been PVI as a vehicle for me to really sort of embrace that. I love it. And I was talking to one of the other attendees that, it really is the mix of science and that lived experience and trying to improve outcomes for, our loved ones. So I just want to thank PVI for giving us the opportunity and also just really raising visibility of Australia in that international forum. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chris. And in a minute, I will show our sponsors slide. It's been lovely to see some of our sponsors online as well today, because I know they're really interested in this. There's 2 quick comments I wanted to make. One was, I guess around the world, we've all been thinking about how international events are impacting on patients. We've had a lot of discussion on stage and off stage here about thinking about where funding isn't available for patient communities, where treatments have not been available in recent months with aid programs ending. And that's been very much in our minds. We've also been thinking about possible implications for countries such as Australia with changes in policy. And one of the things we felt really strongly and noticed really strongly was, in fact, that our president of HTAi, our now past president, but Dr. Rabia Sucho, was actually not able to attend our meeting just because she couldn't be confident that she could travel safely to our event. And this sort of set the context of the meeting in a slightly different perspective to before, but I think in a way it connected us across patient communities, across the income strata, and that unified principle of being able to attain the best possible outcomes. And that just makes me think to mention the incredible keynote address we had from Bogie Ellison. And he really challenged us to think about what if health was a pillar of society? And he beautifully connected that to themes of sustainability, including taking care of the environment and how all these things come together. And he challenged us to say, look, we've never had more, but we're all burnt out, you know. So how is it that there's so much more in the world and yet we cannot meet need? And he suggested to us that it was a crisis of mindset. And I think for patient communities, the way he spoke about mindset really resonated. And he suggested to us that quantitative change can make incremental change, but qualitative change has the potential to make exponential change. Now, we're a minute over and I can't go further there, but maybe Google his work, because I think it was a really thrilling place to start our thinking. So at a time when sometimes we're feeling a bit overwhelmed with what is not within our control in this realm, I think that idea about mind shift was really powerful for thinking about where do we have power and what can we do together? And it was really encouraging. I'd love to thank everyone for the comments in the chat box as well too. We really appreciate those and bringing out the different ideas there. I just want to, and I apologize for being a fraction over time, I just want to firstly thank our incredible patient voice partners. They are much more than patient voice partners, but in this context, I'm summarising them that way. Cara Philpott and Megan Cross, thank you so much. When you get back to Australia, you'll see we really appreciated your videos. Claire and Chris, thank you so much for contributing, especially Chris, because Chris really got pulled in over dinner tonight to come and join us, and we so appreciate that. And I also just want to thank the sponsors who we really appreciate in Patient Voice Initiative. Every year we write our work program for what can we do to ensure that patients are seen, heard and valued in health technology assessment in Australia. And we really appreciate their ongoing sponsorship. If you've never heard of us before or health technology assessment, you can always check out our Patient Voice Hub there. It's written with the aim that we know you've got a lot going on in your life and health technology assessment is just one thing. So you can drop in there and do a 15-minute topic and just find out about something that's of interest to you. There's a new topic up there about preparing when things are in the pipeline, as one coming through on health economics, and we're also going to have one very shortly up on patient preference studies. So big thank you again to our speakers, and thank you so much for joining us for this, and we look forward to doing this again next year. We will be going to Istanbul for HTAi, and we will also later this year put out the information for any people in Australia who would like to be a 2026 patient voice partner. So thank you all and have a great day in Australia.